Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hello everyone, and thanks for joining us for this Saturday's edition of Alaska Weather. On the satellite imagery, starting out with yesterday, you can see we had a lot of clouds here. Again, mostly non-precipitation producing stuff here, mid and high level stuff with some moisture back off the coast, and not too bad out here over the southwest or western areas, as well as up to the north. We had some moisture poised to move northward into the southeast coast here that was just a little bit to the south there, and a pretty active front that brought storm force winds to the western Aleutians during the day yesterday, and pushed off to the east some moisture here kind of skiffing the permafrost with some clouds. And going ahead to today, we'll see that that front's really weak in the main low center, still pretty active here, but sliding off to the east, south of the Aleutians there, and the front weakening considerably up to the north here through this area. So have this moisture right through here. Brought a little bit of rain in across the permafrost earlier today, but mostly the gusty northeast winds, as high as 35 miles an hour this afternoon, and just clouds, drying it out a little bit there. A narrow band of flurries right through the interior from the Yukon Delta up to the Yukon Flats, and pretty brisk northeast winds up to the north of that line, all the way back up to the western Arctic coast there. Indian Mountain seeing gusts as high as 35 miles an hour, and about 10 to 20 miles an hour, some higher gusts over toward Fort Yukon. The lower elevation area is not seeing all that much in the way of wind, and we have a weakening band of moisture here, or actually the remnants of front that came northward interacting with an upper level trough, and quite an area of snow falling across the Copper River Basin this afternoon. Gulkana down to 3/4 of a mile in snow, and some rain back along the coast. And this area that came northward and northwest there brought snow in over the northern areas of the Panhandle. Juneau picked up anywhere from a half to maybe 1.5 inches as the temperatures stayed cold enough for that to remain as snow, but some mixed rain and snow back over the remainder of the area, beginning to end down to the south there as the back edge of that moves up to the north. Otherwise, still some clouds kind of dissipating over Bristol Bay, but hanging in there for some areas of rain and snow, ending over Kodiak, being just cloudy this afternoon with the main rain shifting up to the north here, and this moving northward as well. Not so much this one. This low pressure area will pull back to the northwest this evening and tonight, but a stronger one down here off the map will definitely bring much stronger winds, heavier rain into the Kodiak Island area, Alaska Peninsula, North Gulf Coast, and back into Bristol Bay. Probably see some storm warnings with that as it pulls northwestward. Otherwise today there's a front out to the west, a couple of weak troughs here mostly moving off to the west, and a little bit of a gradient here producing those gusty winds. We'll see at the higher elevations there are for the central interior winter weather advisories for the higher elevations due to blowing snow, reducing visibilities there. Really not so much anything falling that's heavy. This again really just scattered areas of flurries, and either side of that not much at all. And some snow over the Copper River Basin today, and the rain and snow down across the southeast coast. For tonight, again, the remnants of another front moves up, and the gradient beginning to tighten. You can see a pretty active low center pulling up toward Kodiak Island, and that gradient really tightens up. So into the gales later tonight from Kodiak right up into the North Gulf Coast, Barren Islands, and gradual increase in winds over the interior as well, especially through the central interior and back to the northwest. Staying pretty breezy out here over the Bering Sea, about like you saw today over the Pribilofs, 20 gusts 35 miles an hour, and a little bit less in the way of wind down here over the Aleutians. with just probably north 10 to 20. Not too bad there, some scattered showers. And eventually some cooler air trying to slide southward, but most of it staying out to the west. Look for the snow to change over to some showers, mixed rain or snow showers, and staying mostly snow, whatever falls, but it'll be lighter and more intermittent. Juneau, Haines on up to Skagway and the Klondike Highway. Otherwise, for tomorrow, that next front, here's the storm pulling westward here, moves to the Alaska Peninsula, and good storm force winds, gales here pulling back with it as it goes. A very tight gradient there across Bristol Bay, and also the southwest interior looking pretty windy as well. Could see gusts up to 60 miles an hour, Sparravon and across the mountainous terrain here, Kilbrook Mountains. But moisture staying mostly south here along the coast, where it'll be rain heavy at times from the Kenai Peninsula back down across Kodiak and into the Aleutian Range, and mostly along the west side of the mountains here, or the eastern slopes of the western Alaska Range and the Kilbrook Mountains, maybe the Kuskokwim. Pretty light precipitation west of the mountains, and nothing to the north as that warm front moves northward there. Just probably some variable mid and high level clouds getting in the Tanana Valley. And this area of precipitation probably won't reach this extent, say Yakutat, definitely to the east or much inland, until probably tomorrow evening or later tomorrow night. Has a pretty good upper level ridge building right through this area into the interior there. But look for a big increase in the winds here along the southeast coast, gales and storms with 50 knot winds, or 40 to 50 knot winds, even very brisk over the inside waters, although it should be dry tomorrow over the southern areas. For the Monday outlook, again, that another front brings some gale force winds back into the southeast coast here with rain, a little more extensive than tomorrow with this front, and that'll extend all the way back along the North Gulf Coast with gale force winds right down into the Barren Islands and Kamishak Bay areas there, but diminishing here over Kodiak Island with the front north of the area there, winds really laying down into that 10 to 20 knot range, or 10 to 20 miles an hour, say 15 knots, 15 to 20 knots by the afternoon hours. Scattered rain and snow showers again over the southwest interior, and not much going on in the up to the north here, but still a very tight gradient across the Brooks Range in the northwest, so keeping very windy conditions up in that area. Gusts over 50 miles an hour in locations with gales out into the Chukchi Sea. Could even be some storm force winds there around Cape Lisburne and Point Hope, with lighter winds central coast onto the east, but even the north slope looks pretty breezy. And the northern Bering Sea as well. Not too bad on the wind here for the eastern Aleutians, with a few showers going there. Not bad day for the Alaska Peninsula, Falls Pass, Cold Bay looking dry. And showers a little cooler out here over the Aleutians, north winds 15 to 30 miles an hour, with colder air coming around this low center, trying to change that over to snow showers there for the Adak-Atka areas. Otherwise, temperatures down along the Panhandle were in the lower 30s with the snow in the north to mid 40s down to the south in the milder air. 46 at Klawock this afternoon, 32 up at Skagway, 41 over at Cordova, 11 degrees with snow in Gulkana, 30 degrees Kenai, 39 at Homer, 44 in Kodiak, Anchorage at 26. 9 at Delta, 3 below zero at Fairbanks, and a -2 at Fort Yukon, 6 above at Eagle, and Bettles -5 with a 7-degree reading at Tanana, Ambler 0, Kotzebue 1, and -9 at Shishmaref. That was the same temperature Barrow had up there in the Arctic coast there, with a -14 at Atchison and -10 over at Point Lay. 9 degrees at Point Hope, and very gusty winds going on there from the northeast, 25 at Gamble. And in the teens here from Unalakleet all the way down to Amonik and St. Mary's, but Macoriac up to 21 degrees, 15 in Bethel, -6 in McGrath, and upper 30s for the Pribilofs, upper 30s and lower 40s out over the Aleutians. Adak, one of the warmer locations today, with 43 degrees, although Chignik here had 45, as did Port Hayden with a 35-degree temperature at Cold Bay, Unalaska 39. Lows tonight, as cold as 32 degrees below zero up here at Arctic Village, with below zero conditions just about through the Tanana Valley, all the way out to the west and northwest across the northern Seward Peninsula, with above zero conditions to the south. Single numbers all the way down until you get to the Kuskokwim Delta, mid-20s to lower 30s here through southern Alaska, milder for the Panhandle, and upper 30s for the Aleutians. Highs tomorrow right around 40 for the Pribilofs, lower 40s for the Aleutians, 45 around Alaska, and upper 40s there over the southern southeast coast, with teens, 20s, and 30s, some cases mid-30s here over south central Alaska. See the outline of the mountains quite nicely right here. Single numbers to the north, below zero even north of that, and well below zero for the north slope, and minus 20, the forecast high for the greater Arctic Village area. For flying weather, marginal VFR edging its way up to the coastline with IFR conditions on its heels there, mostly along and off the coast of the North Gulf Coast as well, but this will be sliding up into western Prince William Sound and probably getting into Passage Canal and then on to the south here across Kodiak Island, the Aleutian Range, and pretty good batch out over the southeast Bering Sea, but the easterly flow keeping it out along the coastline or a little bit even west of the coastline with quite an area marginal VFR out over the Bering Sea, but looks pretty good here up to the north, including the Arctic coast. Possibly a mostly VFR day tomorrow even there. Anaktuvik definitely VFR with conditions for Adigan, the same VFR. Chilkoot, or for Lake Clark and Merrill, marginal VFR, lowest conditions on the eastern entrances, western approach VFR. And for Rainy on the Kuskokwim Valley side of things, looks VFR, otherwise marginal conditions with the lowest values on the east side. For windy, it'll stay VFR the entire day tomorrow. Isabel and Mentasta as well, VFR through the day. And for Tanita, VFR possibly becoming marginal, mainly on the eastern entrance. Portage, IFR becoming IFR here on the east side, marginal otherwise through the pass into the west. Chilkoot and White, marginal VFR. Freezing levels, lowest out here over the Bering Sea, but still at the surface coming up to near Nunivak Island, and 6,000 feet over the southern southeast coast, with 2,000 feet now lifting northward to the Alaska Range. For icing, the heavier stuff mostly along and off the coast here, with some icing possibly moving inland and northward here late in the afternoon, but back to the west, right up to the Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, the Aleutian Range, and then some lower icing possibilities out here over the southern Bering Sea, as well as the western Aleutians. Upper level wind flow chart showing a strong jet here across the Pacific, punching all the way over to about 150, 145 west, and it kind of diverges with one branch heading into California, another southeast flow pulling northwestward here into southern Alaska, and this is that storm track there on the southwest side of that branch, with pretty good ridging developing into the eastern interior. So winds at 9,000 feet up to 75 knots here for the Panhandle, 50 knots from the North Gulf Coast, highs 80 knots cutting across the southern Alaska Range, but you can see quite windy conditions in most areas all the way up to the Arctic coast and out to the west. Same thing at 3,000 feet, 55 to 70 knot winds, with this low center in the front producing 50 to 60 knot winds there along the Panhandle, and turbulence severe possible, especially for small aircraft here below 5,000 feet over a good portion of the southwest interior to Kodiak Island, western Arctic coast, and right along the Panhandle up to the eastern North Gulf Coast. Not quite as bad out here over the Aleutians, and after the break I'll return with the marine forecasts.
Over the past few decades, the helicopter aeromedical industry has proven itself to be a very effective means of saving the lives of those who are critically ill or injured. However, during the relatively short life of our industry, far too many aeromedical programs, its crews, and sometimes its patients have fallen to tragic accidents. And the highest percentage of these crashes have been caused by human error. Now, often this fact leads us to ask the question, what was the pilot thinking? Why did he act the way he did? And what's even more confusing is why are the same mistakes still being made over and over again throughout our industry? As you go through this training and watch the scenarios, we suggest that you heavily concentrate on the error chain depicted in each scenario and how these steps ultimately lead to a crash. Ask yourself, what were the contributing factors? Were there opportunities to break this chain? Was there a specific culture in a program that affected the pilot's decision making? And finally, were there direct and/or indirect pressures that influenced the pilot's decision? And finally, before we begin with the scenarios, there are two major points to note. First, none of these scenarios are contrived. Each contain multiple contributing factors and influences taken directly from industry accident and incident reports, as well as confidential surveys recently completed by your peers concerning practices and safety problems within our industry. And second, this video would not be possible if it were not for the support of aeromedical helicopter operators, hospital programs, and their crews, as well as all of the other supporting agencies named in the closing credits of this video. These companies donated their equipment, personnel, and the display of their logos to demonstrate unsafe safety practices in the sincere hope that taking a proactive approach through this training will help to significantly improve the safety record of this worthwhile industry. Now let's begin with the first scenario. The day begins with Anne, an experienced flight nurse, in her home about to leave for a day shift. As she leaves, she promises her daughter that she will be home that evening to see her dance in a recital. The morning also starts with Skip, the day shift duty pilot, on the phone with his ex-wife. He is promising her that he will be there at 8 p.m. sharp to pick up the kids for their planned week-long camping trip. Skip's ex-wife reminds him that she too has an obligation that evening and would not appreciate him being late. The shift begins with Skip checking weather, which in the morning is VFR with haze, but is forecasted to diminish to IFR conditions by the end of the shift. This is a VFR program based at an airport. Following his weather check, Skip pre-flights the aircraft, while Anne checks all of the medical supplies and equipment on the aircraft along with Paul, a new flight medic who has just completed training during the past 2 weeks. Following the pre-flight activities, Skip, Anne, and Paul join a program staff meeting where the prior month's activity was reviewed. Flights are down, another flight program in the local area is turning up their marketing efforts, and the hospital administration is getting concerned. The day progresses with no flight requests. Skip keeps himself busy reading magazines while Anne and Paul inspect and clean their equipment. The weather has started to deteriorate, and the new forecast continues to support IFR conditions before the end of the shift. By mid-afternoon, the weather has lowered, with rain showers and mist also added to the amended forecast. Skip feels comfortable to call his ex-wife at 4 p.m. to tell her that the weather has lowered to the point that he doesn't expect to fly and sees no problem with him being on time for the kids. Shortly after that call, a flight request comes in for the transfer of the patient from the requesting hospital to a third hospital. Skip checks the weather, and all points are still reporting basic VFR conditions, even though the forecast is for IFR. Skip is a locally familiar pilot who has flown this route many times before, and although the weather has diminished throughout the day, it's still above the minimums for their operation specifications. He's also concerned about their low flight activity and decides that he can fly the trip and be back in time to beat the IFR weather and pick up his kids on time. Anne questions his decision because of the weather and her concern for getting back to make her daughter's recital. Skip assures her he would not accept the flight if he didn't think he could make it all the way home. Paul, the new crew member, offers no opinion on the decision to fly. The helicopter departs the airport for the requesting hospital. The weather during the first leg is as stated in the weather briefing, and they arrive at the referring hospital without difficulty. The patient is loaded into the helicopter and they depart for the receiving hospital. During this leg, the weather has obviously started to deteriorate due to ceilings, haze, and mist. This causes Skip to have increasing concern as to whether the conditions he's observing will worsen before they get home. In addition to attending to her patient, Anne is also becoming concerned about the weather and its possible effect on getting home. The helicopter arrives at the receiving hospital and the patient is unloaded. While the medical crew is delivering the patient to the appropriate location, Skip receives a telephone weather briefing which reveals marginal VFR to spotty IFR conditions in the area and below Skip's personal comfort level. When the crew returns, he briefs them on the current conditions, his concerns, and suggests calling the hospital van to come and get them and leaving the helicopter overnight. Anne immediately becomes very upset and ridicules Skip for his decision to take the flight in the first place, especially when she questioned the weather from the start and reminds him of her promise to her daughter. She argues that if the weather is at legal operations minimums, and he has flown that route many times before, he should at least try it before he gives up. His thoughts also briefly go to the grief he will receive from his ex-wife for being late to get the kids. He looks to Paul for his thoughts, and he simply says he's willing to go along with whatever the other two decide. Rather than continue the argument, Skip agrees to try it, and they depart for the base.
Welcome back. Well, storms and gales out for the outer coastline tomorrow, and gales and small craft advisories here for the inside waters, all from the mostly southeast or east-southeast direction. And again, those will drop off later tomorrow night, and then come back up again on Monday. 40 to 45 knots here from the southeast along the coast, and gales over the southern inner channels and small craft advisories to the north there for Monday. And for the North Gulf Coast tomorrow, about 40 knots, but winds increasing here as you head west, and earlier in the day, 50 to 55 knots here across Kodiak Island, and those will be coming down in the afternoon with northeast 20 to 40 knots there from Cook Inlet on down into Kamishak Bay. And for Monday, winds dropping off here. That next front lifting north, so less wind here for Kodiak Island, but gales for the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, and all of the North Gulf Coast. Small craft advisories, Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet. For the Bristol Bay tomorrow, 55 knot winds from the east, at least for a portion of the day. Otherwise, gales here down the Bering Sea side of the peninsula. Southeast 50 knots and northwest 25 here for the Alaska Peninsula. For the outlook for Monday, winds really becoming light here with variable at 10 there on the Pacific side of the peninsula. Light easterlies on the Bering Sea side, but possibility of 30 to 35 knot winds for Bristol Bay. And for the Aleutians, east side, 30 knot winds from the north and northwest. Otherwise, northerlies 25 knots here for the remainder of the Fox Islands. Northeast 20 knots. Central Aleutians a little brisker for the western zones. 25 knot north or small craft advisories from the northwest here for the Aleutians, and could be some small area gales here northwest in Nikolsky. Otherwise, lighter and more variable over toward Unalaska. For the southwest coast, northeast 30 knots. Gales for St. Lawrence Island and the northern Bering Sea at about 30 knots with some freezing spray, mostly back to the west and northwest of the island there. Pribilofs north 35. For the Monday outlook, not a lot of change here. Northeast 35 for the Pribilofs. No change for St. Lawrence Island or the northern Bering Sea. Northeasterlies at 30 for the entire southwest coast. Up along the Arctic coast for Monday, excuse me, again, possible storm force winds here for the western Capes. Chukchi Sea northeast 30. And lighter winds here for the central and eastern Arctic coast, but the far eastern end could still see some gale force winds. And for tonight, again, kind of windy but dry over the interior. Some variable clouds lifting northward, but really not much in the way of any snow. A lot of this just some leftover stuff from that upper trough swinging through currently. And I've got another weakening front coming up to the coast here for rain, but this next storm already tightening the gradient up for some good gale force winds and possibly storm force winds by tomorrow morning here into the Barren Islands, Kamishak Bay, Kodiak Island, and rainfall on the increase as well. Snow tapering off to some scattered showers over the northern areas tonight. Dry to the south, but even the winds there coming up. As I mentioned, storms and gales along the coast there tomorrow with this low center pulling back to the west. Rain heavy at times and again strong winds here, Kodiak Island, but these will be coming down throughout the afternoon hours and not much moisture getting north of the Alaska Range, but the winds certainly will. Pretty brisk there, gusts 30 to 40 miles an hour here for the higher elevations of a lot of the interior, and most of the strongest winds back out over the western and northwest Bering Sea with less wind to the southeast. And for Monday, another front with more wind and rain here, North Gulf Coast and the Panhandle. And staying mostly dry over the interior, could be a narrow band of flurries to the north.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.